Hello, everybody, and welcome to My Angular Story. My name is Joe Eames. I'm your guest host today, filling in for Aaron Frost. You can also think of me as the discount Aaron Frost. And as our special guest, we have Stephen Cooper.
Hello.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
So, Stephen, we're here to talk to you today about you and your relationship with Angular and a lot of other stuff like that. It's always good to kind of just begin with a brief or not so brief background. Like, who are you? What do you do? What are you doing now? Your basic kind of the stuff that you might give an interviewer at a job, that type of thing. So go ahead.
Right, yeah. So I guess I'm currently based in London. Lived nearish London, I guess, my whole life. And now, well, I'm still in my first job at a company called G Research. They're doing quantitative research and analysis. So I've been there for 8 years now. So I've only had one interview. So that was a long time ago. And I guess doing Angular, probably for the last four of those years, starting with AngularJS. I actually managed to introduce the company to AngularJS. I think we were doing an evaluation between, I think it was like Knockout and Backbone, or whether we should start using AngularJS. So that's when I started with Angular.
Knockout, that was good stuff. Knockout was my first, what you might consider a client-side framework of some kind. Knockout was my very first. I don't think, I guess, really, jQuery tends to be everybody's first, and most people, well, it kind of sits in that realm, right? But I didn't really consider jQuery to really be, but Knockout, right? It was bindings. It was actually doing something. That was cool. So it was revolutionary.
Yeah, so that was then, and then of course I guess it was through the upgrade into Angular, and then I guess fast forward, and I guess it's been quite a big year for me this year. So I did my first, I guess, Angular conference at Angular Connect, and giving a talk there, and even last week made my first contribution to Angular, which is very exciting.
Oh, wow.
Even though it was very small, a nice documentation change. So that's where I'm at with Angular at the moment.
Cool. So what about before you got your job? School? What was your background before that?
Yeah, so I guess I did maths and computer science at university here in Imperial. I mean, I had to go to Imperial because my 2 older brothers went there.
Oh, really?
And so there was a bit of I guess had to keep up with them. Yeah, so I was thinking about doing maths, but then my brother who did maths before me was like, no, don't do maths, do something with computing and maths. So I did that, and during the course, just ended up enjoying the computing side of things a lot more than the maths. And so by the end of my course, I was as far to the computing side as I could be. Because I guess I didn't really start programming till I went to university, which is why I wasn't sure whether, I guess, a computing degree was the right thing for me to do.
Just to translate for our American listeners, maths is the British word for math. Yeah, I think it's so fun. Of all of the things that are unique between American and British English, the pluralization of maths is one of the ones that I find most hilarious. Like, I get it. Boot, lorry, lift, those ones all make sense to me. Yeah. So, what interested you? You went to that university. You wanted to do math. Would you call yourself sort of like a classical, typical, stereotypical math type geek growing up? Is that what was always going to be your thing? I was going to do something math logic related.
Yeah, that was always the subjects I favoured, and I don't know, I had a fantastic maths teacher who was so, I guess, hands on, and like there's just a character who you could look up to, and basically he was one of those people who could do anything. He like built his own house. He could teach us all this maths, and
wow.
And so he was like really, I guess, inspirational, and he always made maths seem so practical and so useful. So I think I was always tending towards, I guess, that way.
And are you bitter because he lied to you about the practicality and usefulness of math?
No, not at all.
I absolutely loved math. Like calculus was one of my favorite things, right? And I'm constantly telling my kids, I've got now they're all teenagers. I'm constantly telling them, go get good grades in math. And then they're like, well, when are we going to use it? And I'm thinking back to in like outside of, well, really even in computer science, what do I do in computer science, math related? I add one, right? That's 99% of the math I do in computer science is adding one. Right? And then like, well, the other day in my head, I used some algebra to figure out what my gas mileage would be based on a trip and whether or not I took this car or another car. But yeah, that's pretty good. Using calculus in my regular life. No, unfortunately, I don't ever get to do that. I wish I had more opportunity.
That was definitely one of the things I guess I ran into transitioning from school into university. Math completely changed and became so much more theoretical. So the practical side of the programming and computing suddenly felt, I guess, a lot more real and a lot more applicable to things.
Right.
So that's why I guess moved towards it.
Did you you only started programming at university, you said? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. The only bit of, I guess, programming that I did was they had that Lego, I think it's Lego Mindstorm.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you could, I think, drag some blocks about and create a little program to, I guess, program the servers and things. So when I was at school, I did a project there where I made this, I guess, some Lego just, turn around and then shoot some Lego bricks off to try and knock targets down. So I guess that was like the first time that I had written, I guess, some code or even just, made the code with the editor to make something happen. And that was, I guess, the first time that I'd come across it, really, apart from drawing shapes with the turtle program, I think, logo. But yeah, it wasn't really until I went to university that I did the first bit of programming, and that was in Haskell. So that was my first experience.
Haskell was your first experience.
Yeah. And
that's an interesting first language to have.
Yeah, they explained it to us in that for everyone coming into the computing course, there was lots of different experience levels. So some people have been programming, I guess, since they were, young children, but they found that pretty much no one had done Haskell. So it was this like level playing field for your first language. But even still, I definitely felt out of my depth in that first year when other people, could just skip all the lectures and all the practice classes and just write the code in half an hour. And I would be there sitting in labs with the helpers trying to understand everything that was going on.
Interesting. So I have a question for you, a funny question for you. What is your least geeky, least nerdy attribute, right? In what way are you like very stereotypical?
Oh, wow. That's a difficult question. I mean, I guess being sporty doesn't really make you not geeky. I mean, I do like, sports and triathlon. That's my other
triathlon
hobby. Yeah.
Oh.
But, I don't know how to answer that really.
Well, let's tell me a little bit. We're gonna take a sidetrack here. Tell me a little bit about your triathlon experience and stuff.
Yeah, so I picked that up when I got to university and joined the triathlon club there and started, training for that and competing, which was quite a lot of fun. Because I guess previously to that, I'd played a lot of table tennis, ping pong, but so I wanted a break from that. And so took up triathlon and competed for Imperial at some of our competitions that we had. But I think a lot of that was just I enjoyed getting out into the countryside, riding, a bit of fresh air. It's a nice break from the computer labs.
Right. Have you ever done an Ironman?
I haven't done. That's something I would like to do, but I think at the moment I've got two small children, 5 and 3, and it's just not conducive to doing the amount of training that you need to do for an Ironman. And so I'd love to do one day, but I think I'm going to have to wait a certain amount of years before I can really put the training in.
Yeah, I think my favorite idea of a triathlon would be a first-person shooter game, then a real-time strategy game, and then maybe like a sports game. All on the PS4. That would be my triathlon. All right. Very cool. Is Imperial University, they have a pretty big CS program?
Yeah, I think they do. I think the intake was about, 150 or so. I don't know whether that counts as big or not, but
how many languages did you ultimately learn while you were at school?
So I guess they started us on Haskell and then did most of the programming in Java was their main language. So that was they probably focused on those two languages the most. But then there was quite a lot of, the theoretical side of computing as well. And I guess as I did a joint maths and computing degree, I missed out on some of the more low-level computing side of the courses because we were doing, like statistics and other pure maths courses. So it was an interesting mix of, the two subjects.
No statistic specific or math specific languages. Like, again, this isn't really my area of expertise, but like R or stuff like that.
Yeah, we did MATLAB. Yeah, I can't say I look back and think, I loved MATLAB. It wasn't the most fun to use.
Not your cup of tea?
No.
All right, so you left university and your job at quantitative. What was the name of the company?
G Research.
G Research, where you do quantitative research and analysis. Which by itself, as soon as I heard that, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't even have a clue as to what that actually means." So, can you give us an understanding of what it is that you're doing, and then we'll talk about how Angular fits in to that.
Okay, so I guess the company as a whole provides a trading platform or algorithmic trading platform, so that clients can use that platform to trade algorithmically, and then they also provide all the tools for a big team of researchers to come up with trading ideas that they can then sell on to people. And so my role in the
now we're talking stock trading.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all around the world, 24 hours a day. So it's that's the kind of platform that's been built up and is being supported. But then there's also a really big research side of the firm, and I'm based in that side of things. I'm working for one of the research managers, giving him the tools that he can drill into the simulated trading and ideas to see how different potential strategies perform over time and whether there's any degradation in them. So my role is really to give him the tools he needs to visualize that data, drill into it, find out if there's something odd going on, so he can then go and speak to the researchers. So I guess that's where Angular has come in and producing a web app for him to be able to do all of that investigations in.
Huh. Very interesting. Interesting. So did you obtain that job more because of your heavy maths background, or was it really just CS? And then as you've been there, is use of your maths background actually been a really important part of your job? Or is it like, for me as a typical business programmer, if I had gotten through, arithmetic, that would have been sufficient for literally every job that I've done. Right.
Yeah. No, I think the course that I did probably did help fit, I guess, what they were looking for. But in reality, the part of the business that I've ended up in, I don't need the maths background. I'm not doing any of the heavy statistical work. It's useful to have a rough idea of what people are looking for, when they're looking for correlations in the data. But that's just more an idea of understanding what our clients want to be able to do with the data.
Right.
So, there's loads of people in my team that, they don't have a mathematical background.
Mm-hmm.
They've come, I guess, either more computing, or there's someone who did politics as their main degree.
Oh, wow.
And they're, working as a programmer. So we're quite varied in that sense.
And which side of Brexit does that person fall on?
Yes, that's a fun topic at the moment.
I was just in London, of course, for Angular Connect as well. And yeah, it's amazing. Like, it's just plastered all over, and it's the topic for right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood, and over the last few years, I've gotten to know a lot of great people within the Microsoft community, and specifically in the .NET area. One of our guests from JavaScript Jabber, Sean Clabo, actually reached out to me and said he wanted to start a show on .NET, and there are a ton of people out there that I feel like sometimes get neglected in the .NET space. So if you're one of those folks, you've been listening to maybe one or two of the other .NET focused or Microsoft focused podcasts for a while and thought, well, where's the devchat.tv style podcast for me in .NET? You can find it. It's at adventuresin.net. .NET is spelled out, D-O-T-N-E-T. adventuresin.net.com. Go check it out today.
Do you personally wish you were using more of your maths, or is that really not what you want to be?
No, I'm quite happy not to be using it. It's funny. I had a family friend who is involved in another. They're also a developer, and they really use their math skills, I guess, a lot in terms of what they're doing. And it's taken him probably 5-6 years to accept the fact that, I'm really enjoying just being a developer, and I'm not, following down that same route of trying to move into the actual research itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I definitely found for myself that I enjoy the visual aspect of making something and seeing how it fits together, and more than, I guess, trying to understand the different maths formulas and seeing how they apply.
Right.
So I'll leave that to the researchers.
Right. No desire to wear a lab coat to work every day.
No.
Not that they do that in maths, but still. All right. So tell me, let's talk about, really get into the Angular. Tell me about your first exposure to Angular, what it was like, how that applied to the project that you're working on at the time, and then we'll move forward from there. But let's talk about your first exposure to Angular and how you got into it and found it and that sort of thing.
So I guess, as I was touching on before, the team that I was in about, I think it was 2015, they're just about to start making some internal web apps. And they wanted to decide whether they should build on the tech stack of other teams in the company, which was they were using Knockout and Backbone, or whether they should, I guess, look at any other frameworks that were, I guess, appearing at that time.
And how long had you been in the company at this time?
So I've been there about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess originally I was doing a little bit of C++ in there, but I can't say I was really enjoying that, and so I was happy to move towards this other side of the team. in terms of starting to present the data. And so, I remember those initial demos of AngularJS where people would, do the binding on the scope, and then you'd start typing and you'd see it being reflected immediately, and thinking, oh wow, this is amazing, and this is really, I guess, not easy, but you could produce something which was reacting to your changes and start putting the pieces together. And I think it was when I then did a bit more research into what recruiters were, I guess, looking for in terms of skills, and Angular was beginning to pop up. And I think that helped convince my manager that, this was a good technology to invest in.
Right.
And so we did, and started producing our first Angular app.
So when you were playing around with it, had you had much experience with anything else JavaScript related before that?
No. So Angular is, was my first taste of web development, which, looking back now, I can see I've got lots of gaps in my knowledge, because I've just come at it straight into Angular. And so I haven't spent time doing jQuery or, and all the what you can do with HTML and CSS. So right. I'm definitely aware at this point in time, it's going back and filling in all these gaps to give myself a bit more of a rounded, I guess, experience and knowledge. Because I was jumping straight in and just following any tutorials or docs that were available.
It's kind of interesting. I would call myself I would say that I have more of a medium experience with that. I started doing web development in 99 and had to do plenty of plain HTML and CSS, and then jQuery came around and people just started doing that. And but now, jQuery is not a very in-demand skill, and it's not a very common one. So still, people that were around longer find themselves in the same place of, now I do feel like there's this movement back to you should be able to manipulate the DOM and understand the underpinnings of what's going on, and that's a valuable thing, even with all these high-level frameworks that are in play. So it's interesting to me to see this constant circle of, and of course, there's no developer on the earth who doesn't have gaps in their background and their knowledge, right? Nobody knows everything. So there's always places to go back and fill in.
Because one of the things I've noticed with that is, I think sometimes you'll over-engineer a problem based on, I guess, the tools that you know. So, because I know and use Angular, so then I try and do everything with Angular, when actually, there's much simpler ways of doing it with just some raw CSS or things like that. So I'm definitely finding it's quite important now to make sure I do understand these building blocks and use the right tools for the job.
As do you know who Uncle Bob is? Robert C. Martin.
Don't think so.
He's yet one more developer out there. But he said something to me that was very meaningful, which was, it's the things that don't change that are important to learn.
Okay, yes. Yeah.
All right. So your first exposure was to Angular. You saw that it was benefiting, it was getting to be an advanced skill. This is AngularJS at the time, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. You so convinced, and that became the project du jour, or the framework du jour, and started using AngularJS there to visualize all this stuff. Tell me about what it was like for those. How long did you use AngularJS before you personally started using Angular?
I guess I think it was 2 years. Because I remember going to Angular Connect in 2015. So I did a workshop there and the talks there. And I think 2016 was still on AngularJS, and they were talking about Angular 2 coming out. And I think it was 2017 that it actually came out. So I guess it was about 2 years where we were using AngularJS. So in that time, we built up some quite sizable apps. And so that when the Angular 2 did come along, there was again this slight pushback on whether we should just, carry on, move them forward to Angular, or, there's someone in the team was suggesting, well, it's such a big change, we should potentially look at the other frameworks that were appearing at that time, and reevaluate. whether it still is the right choice, because it's the effort of going from AngularJS to Angular. Is that going to be the same amount of work as going to one of the other frameworks? So there was a little bit of back and forth on that. But I think what was really helpful is actually going to, I guess, Angular Connect at the time and beginning to get a sense of these upgrade paths. And then that was something that would be, I guess, invested in and you would be helped through it. And I think that was something that was an easy sell to my manager to say, we're going to get all these benefits from Angular 2 and we're going to be helped to get there with our existing apps. And so that worked for most of them. Some of them we decided to just completely rewrite from the ground up because they weren't so big and it wasn't too hard to move over the code. So we did that for some of them, but for the bigger ones, I guess they did transition over time.
Right. All right. Let's talk about the Angular 2 now. You started using Angular 2 roughly a couple of years ago?
Yeah, probably about 2 years ago.
Well, now it's just Angular, right?
Yeah.
Angular 2 at the time, but now it's just Angular. Was the transition for you guys easy, hard, difficult? Were you involved a lot? Did you migrate an actually existing app to it, or did you just start rewriting new stuff and leave the old stuff alone?
Yeah, we did. I did one migration, but I guess the app that I migrated was quite small. So I guess maybe migration is a generous word of, I guess, creating the new empty app and bringing the code over. But that worked for that case. But I definitely noticed that I think with Angular 2, things became a lot closer to C#, which was the main language in our company. And so what we suddenly found was that all the devs who are, doing all the C# suddenly could look at, this Angular code and start recognizing the constructs and, the classes and was a much quicker onboarding, especially with TypeScript. So it just felt a lot more familiar. So I think that's definitely something which has worked well at our company. I think also in other enterprise companies, it's probably a similar story where you've got, your C# developers also doing your Angular development now. Whereas I think AngularJS was, I guess, a little bit more removed and not quite as familiar.
Yeah, when you look at it, I feel the same way, but yet when we were doing AngularJS, I did a lot of that with .NET on the background or Java, which .NET and Java, if you squint, they're the same thing. And I feel like people at the time, at least, felt that it was just as natural, even though you look at it now and it seems, man, the parallels are much bigger. But at the time, I felt like it was a very natural front end to .NET and to Java. Although in retrospect, it seems much more different. It seems AngularJS seems a lot more like Vue or React than Angular does. Cool. So let's switch gears just a little bit and let's talk about your community contributions. I want to start with your Angular Connect talk. Tell me about that. Tell me about how that came about. This is your first, It was your first talk, right?
This is my first talk.
First real community contribution, which is pretty funny because, Angular Connect there aren't very many stages bigger than that, certainly in the Angular world. Over here on this side of the pond, we have our conference that we like to say is slightly bigger than Angular Connect. But, that's a big place to start off with. So what inspired you to do a talk? What was your talk about? And how did that all come about?
Yeah, so I've actually literally today released a blog post about this. And
where can people find that? Can you give us
They can find it on my Twitter at CooperDev. But yeah, I'll go through that because I guess it really started back in 2015, actually going to Angular Connect for the first time. And that was, I guess, the first major conference that I'd actually been to as attendee. I just remember just being so excited about it and inspired and encouraged to see that there were all these other developers wanting to learn new things and take these tools back to their company. So that was a really, I guess, motivating experience. So then I was able to keep coming back each year. And I think it's probably in 2017 that I started thinking, I wouldn't mind doing a talk up there. But at the time, it just felt so unattainable.
Yeah.
I guess I felt so, I didn't have the confidence to think that I could know what I was talking about enough, and which was probably true at the time. I was still had a lot to learn.
Intimidating.
Yeah, it was intimidating. And then I think in 2018, I was sitting in a talk by a lady called Bo, and she opened her talk. She was talking about Nest.js, but she started it by saying that the previous year she was sitting in the audience thinking, I would like to be on that stage. And then, there she was on the stage about to give her talk. And so then I was then sitting in the audience thinking, oh yeah, that would be really cool. I want to try and make that happen. But I had no idea what kind of topic I could cover. So I knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't know, what I could talk about. And then earlier this year, I ran into this problem with a custom select component, and the client wanted to add in lots more metadata into the dropdown. So we had a list of dates, and then they want to be able to label those dates with, either a warning message or whether that date has been archived. So it was basically putting these icons into the select dropdown. But I couldn't work out how to do it apart from passing flags in via inputs. And suddenly this shared component that I had was getting really, really complicated and bloated, because you had all these different feature toggles. Mm-hmm. You only really needed for the most complicated use case. And then everywhere else where that component was being used, you had these extra features, I guess, you had to be careful about. So I thought about NG content, being able to project these icons in. But the problem with that is you don't know where the content's being projected. Right. So you can't tie up the icons with the current, I guess, selected item. So I was banging my head against the wall and searching, on Google for an answer to this. And it was really hard, as in I couldn't find what I needed. I knew what I wanted, but then it wasn't until I stumbled across a blog post by, I think his name is Nathaniel Basil. Mm-hmm. And so he was introducing ng template outlets. And so as soon as I saw what he was doing, it was like, oh, this is perfect. Because, you can provide your template and the template understands the context of where it's being displayed, and you can have it repeated multiple times. And so I implemented this in our select component, and all that complicated logic moved to the place, where I was using those features, and the component itself became really clean and simple again. And so, I thought this was really great, and this is fantastic. So I, started telling people in my team and, other teams in the company, and actually then wrote my first, I guess, blog post about it and posted that internally. That in itself was a bit of a scary experience. Suddenly thinking, what will people think? How many mistakes have I made in this? But I did it. And, some people then, I guess, came and asked me about it, but probably it went, it just slipped under everyone's radar. And nobody, I guess, really picked up on it. But then I guess it wasn't too much after that then I got the email for, I guess, the call proposals for Angler Connect.
And here you have this perfect material.
And I was like, oh, I've got a material. I'll try and submit this talk. But when I first had that, I thought that you had to produce your slides, write a script, have all of that polished to be able to submit.
Right.
And
right.
And we were like going through lots of things in our personal life with our family at the time. So I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. But then I guess I had one morning free. I checked the form, thought, I might as well check what they're actually requiring. And it wasn't that much. So I was like, oh, okay, let me just quickly fill in this form and hit submit. So I think I just did it in an hour and then carried on, realizing that I didn't have anything to lose by trying and putting it in there, which is, it turned out all right. And then I guess the week later, there were time slots, like 15-minute slots you could book with the organizers. So I was a bit nervous about actually, speaking to them I had no now that I've actually spoken to them and met them in real life, they're incredibly friendly people.
Right.
But so I had some time with Pete Darwin, and he, helped me look at my submission and said he quite liked the idea. So that was quite a nice confidence boost. And so I made a few changes, added in a bit about the speaking experience that I had done internally at my company.
Right.
Because at that time, I didn't have any videos of me presenting, and that was something that they had on the form.
Right.
Yeah, and then that was it. I waited, and then I got that email saying, we've accepted your talk. And I was a bit overwhelmed, excited, but then realizing, oh, I've actually got to do this then.
Right. Huh.
Adventures in Angular is a devchat.tv production made in partnership with Hero Devs. Hero Devs is a group of Angular experts who can help your team code like true developer heroes. If your team needs an Angular expert, reach out to Aaron at hero.dev today.
Have you watched your talk since then?
Yes. Yeah. I think I watched it on the way as soon as it came up.
Really?
Just to see how it came across.
And what's your critique of your talk?
I think I could have been more excited about them. But I guess I was in the zone of presenting the material. And I think sometimes I could have dropped back and really tried to, emphasize just how much these had really helped us and the power and how powerful they are.
Well, your next talk, you can work on being a little bit more excited.
Yeah, and that's what I'm still working on my submission to ngconf, trying to.
All right.
Trying to come across the pond.
Right. So for all those listeners out there, ngconf's CFP will be open till I think right around January 1st. I don't know the exact date. So if you're feeling inspired based on Steven's story, time to act on that. Let's wrap up by moving into your recent contribution to Angular itself, and let's talk about that before we finish up.
Yeah, so in actually trying to think about a slightly new topic for ngconf, I was looking through, some of the Angular docs in ng component outlets, and that's when I realized that in the docs they were using the class name of ng template outlet example. So I was like, oh, that doesn't look right, and that could be a little bit confusing. So I thought, oh, okay, I could try and submit a pull request here to, correct the names of those classes. So I cloned so then you start following, and there's quite a long list of things to read.
Yes.
It's not like when are at work where you just clone it, branch it, push it back.
Right.
You've got to make sure you've got your commit messages right. You've followed all their procedures, and so it was actually a little bit more involved than I thought it might be.
Right.
Just to make some small changes. But in the end, I managed to, do that. And at that time, it was also interesting to then find where that code lived, because it wasn't where I was expecting it to be. Because the actual text of the documentation is not in the same place as the code examples. And then that kind of caught me out a little bit, because the files that I was actually editing weren't where I was expecting them to be. So there's definitely something to learn about how Angular actually combines all those things together. But I managed to put my pull request together, get the commit message, matching their standard, and submitted that. And it got merged.
That's very cool. That's very cool. All right. So we're going to enter what we call our speed round. I'm sure Aaron doesn't do this, but I really want to do this. So okay. I'm going to ask you 4 questions, at most a 1-sentence answer, preferably just a few words answer, right? It's all Angular related. And if you don't have an answer, it's totally fine to find a pass, but you could also feel free to spend a moment thinking about it before you answer. But I'm going to ask you 4 questions about this isn't a test, right? This is opinion.
I know.
And then we'll move into picks. So what's your favorite feature of Angular?
ng template outlets.
I had a hint you were going to say that, but wasn't for sure. What do you think is the worst feature of Outlet? What feature of Angular, worst part of Angular?
Oh, I think I struggle there because I haven't got a wide variety of things to compare it against. I sound quite branched out to the other frameworks. I think potentially the learning curve and onboarding people in our team, that catches them out, and the potential code that you can write when you're not sure what you're doing is quite hairy to then debug.
Right. I get that. Okay. Most confusing feature.
Oh, I'm sure there's been quite a lot, but I've forgotten what they are now.
Nothing sticks out as being particularly confusing to you. I mean, might have been at the time, but now in retrospect, nothing is so painful that you still remember it to this day.
No, I can't say I do.
That's good. It's good. For me, it's not even an Angular 2 feature, thankfully, but transclusion was always my hardest thing with Angular JS. That was the one that always made me the worst. All right. What's the most needed feature that Angular is missing?
Oh, I think it's the reactive framework. I think Mike Ryan spoke about it at Angular Connect, just to enable you to, I guess, plumb into the template directly and have your events flow through. Right. I think that's definitely something which looks really great, and that's something which I am looking forward to. And when
which Mike Ryan talk are you mentioning? We should send people to it.
Can't quite remember the title off the top of my head.
Which conference was it from?
This is Angular Connect.
Angular Connect. So Mike Ryan's talk at Angular Connect. That should be enough for people to find it. If you remember the title, shout it out. All right, so let's talk about picks, and then we'll finish up again with how people find you, and then we'll be done. So Aaron prepped you on what picks are.
Nope, I've heard picks at the end of some other things, and so I'm trying to work out what picks are, but I don't think I really understand.
Well, really just anything that you think is cool. So another podcast that I read, and we don't call it picks, we call it one thing that you would tell a friend about if that friend did not know about that thing. If you found out that a friend of yours didn't know about a thing, you'd be like, oh, you totally have to know about this movie, book, technology, tool, philosophy, anything like that. So I'll go first just to give you a few more moments to think here.
My thinking phase.
So I'm going to pick miniature wargaming, which is a super geeky thing to pick. And I've been a pretty typical geek doing a lot of like games and video games and board games and things like that. I love board games, but in the last year I've gotten into, first it was painting miniatures, and now there's just a lot of cool games out there, such as these war games where you put miniatures out, you paint your own miniatures, you put them out and you play with other people in various ways. There's some cool Star Wars stuff. Warhammer is kind of the one that everybody thinks of, and that's quite popular in the UK as well. But me, I'm more of a Star Wars guy myself, so I stick more to the Star Wars ones. But there's a game called Imperial Assault, which is really fun. You can actually play cooperatively with other people or play versus, and a little bit more like a campaign or a dungeon crawl, kind of like halfway between Dungeons and Dragons and a miniature war game. And there's lots of other things like that. There's a new Star Wars Legion, which is just really just like Warhammer. But I'm going to pick that. For me, it's actually been great because it's given me, for a while, I really didn't have a very artistic outlet, but I started painting, and it's a very artistic thing, even though, it's, painting Star Wars miniatures definitely falls on the geeky side of, I'm not like painting flowers, right? But for me, it's a very soothing and relaxing thing to do to get my mind off of work and just chill out and do something creative and fun. So there we go. That would be my pick, is miniature wargaming and painting.
So I guess my pick would be dev.to.
All right.
I wanted to start, I guess, writing down some of the things that I had discovered or was learning. But I didn't want to go to the effort of, setting up my own website or doing all of that. I didn't, have the time to do that. So having dev.to, come up in the last half a year, or is it a year now? I'm not sure. But so you can sign up there and start writing your own blogs, and it feels like a really friendly place to start producing articles, and already I've read so many useful things on there, and I've now done, I guess, 3 of my own posts, which is quite exciting and definitely feels like the ball's starting to roll. Because there's definitely that writer's block to start with, thinking what can I actually write about. But I think it was Sam Julian. I think he put a tweet up earlier this year where he was like saying the best thing to do is create these really rough posts. So if you've done something, just throw the details into it. Don't worry about writing it up, I guess, at the time, and then you can come back to it and flesh out the details and then turn it into a post. And I think that's been so helpful, because there's times when I'm at work and I want to write something down, but I don't really have the time to write it all properly. But you can throw the details into private GitHub repo and then come back to it and fill out all the details. And that's how I've got started, and I'm up to my 3 posts now, so I'm still very new to it. But it feels nice to finally get going, and that is thanks to dev.to.
Awesome. That's a great pick. Dev.to is awesome. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Stephen, for being on the show. Thanks to all you listeners out there. And we really appreciate your time and your contributions to the community as well. And My Angular Story will be back for another episode.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit